Welcome to Land Speed Legends, a podcast talking to the men, the women, the legends that make land speed racing great. Discover the stories of these ordinary people whose passion for land speed racing has made them legendary. And now, here's your host, the Bonneville Belle, the High Boy Honey, the Salt Princess, Allison Volk-Dean.
The legendary Scott Guthrie has joined me here at the shop as we start to get back to reality from a very extra long speed week. But yeah, let's start from the beginning. You were telling me about your first motorcycle.
Yeah, I was born in 1944, and I rode a motorcycle for the first time in 1958. Mm-hmm. And it was an interesting experience because I eventually bought the motorcycle from the guy, but I couldn't take it home because my parents had told me, no, you absolutely cannot have a motorcycle. So, of course, I did.
Yes, of course.
And then I went without a motorcycle until 1962 when I went to college. And the first thing I did was buy another motorcycle. And then I became aware of the word Bonneville because in 1958 or so, Triumph came out with the motorcycle called the Bonneville, and an acquaintance of mine down the street got one, and I looked it over and I thought, ooh.
That's cool.
Absolutely. But my mind turned to the Salt when I saw the cover of Hot Rod magazine with Mickey Thompson on the cover with his 4-engine job in white. Mm-hmm. And I read all about it, and I thought, boy, that's the thing to do. That's a very manly, brave thing to do.
Yes.
All these guys with crew cuts working on your car. and you know, he was a hero kind of guy.
Yeah, he was. But you were very East Coast at this time. You're living in Florida?
I was living in Florida, and nobody knew very much about Bonneville, which is still the case.
Yeah.
We know about fishing, but not much about Bonneville. And that just kind of rested in the back of my mind for decades. And I had been buying and selling motorcycles, buy two in a box, build one, sell it to get enough money to finish the other one for free. And I was in a magazine store looking at a 1970 or 71 issue of Cycle magazine, and I looked at the records that were set at Bonneville, and there was one for Harleys that was about 136 miles an hour, and I thought, boy, I can beat that. I know all about Harleys. And I was with a friend who looked at me and said, yeah, right. You in the North Woods of Tallahassee, Florida could beat a world record. So I thought, well,
game on.
I've got to prove up. So I did, and I did. And I came to Bonneville in 1973, stunningly well equipped, especially like for this year, because I had built a little work stand for the motorcycle to sit on that was about 6 inches off the ground. And sure enough, when we got there, the pits were underwater. So,
imagine that.
Imagine. And I had some Army surplus equipment boxes that I put all my spare parts in to keep rain off. And they were airtight because that's the way the Army does these things. And people looked, and I put my novice year, I put my bike up on a prepared work stand. And when I opened the equipment boxes, everybody hears this as the air pressure changes, and they go, ooh. And I was hoping that was good.
That was a good ooh.
That was a good ooh instead of, oh, poser. And so I ran the bike, and it was actually reasonably fast. And I got a record on the first running. It lasted 10 minutes. And some guy named Dale Alexander, who was personally sponsored by Dale Yoshimura, the famous Japanese tuner, came along right behind me 10 minutes later and got the record. It has been indelible in my mind because Dale knew what was going on. And in those days, that was before you were born, the SCTA had us run in numerical order. If your bike was 4, you ran first. And if you were 17, if there was an 8, they ran ahead of you.
I didn't know that.
No. They did things strangely sometimes. We're all learning.
Yeah.
It's hard to remember now that we only started in 49.
Yeah.
So they were only 25 years into it. I've raced in the 25th, the 50th, and the 75th anniversaries of the 2 Club. So, but anyway, Dale's number was less than mine, so he was going to run ahead of me. And I'd gone something like 138. He went 160. So I suspected that I was not going to get the record. And I just kind of slumped over to the bike, and my wife pushed me off and fired up. And I looked at him, and the starter looked at me, probably Bob Higbee. And I pointed at Dale with a smaller number, and Dale had a screwdriver in his hand and was fiddling with the carburetors. And he pointed at Higbee and said, "Run him, I'm not ready yet." And later I realized he was just stalling to let me run ahead of him. And I got down to the end. This is back in the 3-run days. And he comes right behind me and goes another 160. And, I'm getting ready to trailer up and leave. And I said, "Why go to impound?" They say, "Well, you never know. His gas might be illegal. They're from out of town." And I got inspected, and it was good. And he was inspected. So I went over to shake his hand. And he said, "I'm sorry, I had to break your record." And I said, "What?" He said, "Well, you ran first. You got the record. You're a Bonneville world record holder."
Ah, cool.
So what I've done is for 50 years, I have passed that on.
Yes.
If there's somebody that is running that's against one of my records, I say, "Go ahead of me." And they say, "But what if I beat you?" I said, "Well, then I lose."
Yeah.
"Well, why don't you go ahead and you can get the record and have the certificate for your wall."
So did that kind of surprise you that he did that in that competitive type?
It did. It did. He was a really nice guy. He was a pilot, and he had a business relationship with Yashimura, and he was an honorable guy.
Nice.
And so I've gotten messages from his son when I published a story about what Dale did for me. His son contacted me and thanked me for the memory of Dale.
Oh, sweet. That's very sweet. So I feel like that's a very Bonneville style way to do things.
Yeah. And I think we're lucky because generally with Bonneville, you're dealing with mature people who know who they are and what they're doing, and they're not trying to develop their personality around how good they are at some sprint race. They know who they are, and they're friendly, they're forgiving generally, and it's such a great group to be around. I hate to go home.
Yeah, I know it is. That's such an interesting point, though, about they can know who they are and where they're at and where they've been. I've never thought about that. I like that.
And they're mature enough that even if you beat them, they can take pleasure in your doing well. In the 70s, in the 80s, I broke a record belonging to Jack Wilson, the famous Triumph tuner from Dallas. And he was the heavy hitter. He'd bring a team of 4 or 5 bikes and riders and everything else. And he could be a little gruff, good Texan. And I broke his record and was in impound. I was taking off my leathers, and I saw him steaming toward me at a controlled
like, oh boy.
at a controlled fast walk. And I thought, oh my God, I made sure to keep my helmet in my hand, so if I had to, I could block a fist with my helmet. And he walked up, he looked me in the eye, and he shot out his right hand and said, "Congratulations." I said, "Oh, well, thank you." He said, "Look, when I set that record, I knew how hard it was. So I know how hard you had to work to break my record."
Yes.
And I thought, that's exactly the point.
That is. I think that's it right there, is and so you appreciate that person being able to compete or break that record. Yeah.
Right.
That's a good point. So after your first trip to Bonneville, were you just hooked, like that was it, or you got the salt fever?
Yes. And it was a combination of really liking the atmosphere of being around these grown-ups doing racing, and the fact that my first record had lasted 10 minutes. That's like going to a wedding party and having a cup of coffee.
Yeah, that's right.
So I said, I'm coming back and I'm going to kick some butt.
Yes.
And
keep a record longer than 10 minutes.
Yeah. So I brought back the same bike, but souped up, very smart, was doing some things that were ahead of the Harley factory at the time. And they wrote me a nice letter and said, "Do you mind if we do this on our factory racers?" And I said, well, okay. and they did it. And I set 4 records in 1 week. And one of them lasted a year.
Nice.
Jack Wilson broke 2 of them the same meet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, records are meant to be broken,
Not mine.
Of course not yours.
Not mine. I mean, generally speaking.
You like to keep them.
Yes.
You got a lot of them, so.
I have several.
Yes. Too many to count sometimes, it feels like.
Well, I think John and I together have 200.
Oh, yeah. That's too many to count. So
we poor racers who have only 10 fingers and 10 toes.
It's hard to keep track.
Yes.
Well, so this is your second year. You went back immediately the following year.
Yeah, I went back 73 was the first, and then 74 was my great Harley year. And then 75, I went a little bit faster, 76, 77. I think I finally quit in 78. And that had taught me that I had taken the Harley as fast as it could go. I had this little 1200cc Harley, and it went 175 on gasoline.
Wow.
And which was the fastest a Harley had ever gone on gasoline in that displacement or smaller. But it was a struggle. Every mile an hour meant a lot of money. And the last year I lost a crank, and didn't hurt the engine, but I lost a crank. And I had a spare crank. Amazing. Enough money for a spare crank. And I thought about it for a while, and I said, I built these 2 cranks, and the second crank has got the same problem built into it.
Yeah.
So we went to the casino. So I took a hiatus. But I have to say that in 1976, my wife Ellen raced.
Oh, really?
She was, and for 30 or 40 years, she wouldn't let me talk about it. She was so embarrassed that she was riding a production 50cc.
Oh.
And at that time, for a reason I've never known, and I hope our listeners will tell me what this was, the SCTA had minimum speeds to set a record. And her minimum was 50. And the place for the record had been in the books for 20 years, but nobody had ever broken 50 in that class. So these people's efforts were forgotten.
Oh, yeah.
They were not recorded because nobody had broken the minimum.
Does SCTA still have minimums on things? Or?
They do at El Mirage.
At El Mirage, but not at Bonneville necessarily.
Not at Bonneville.
Yeah.
I think 2 things happened. One was they recognized the futility of having a minimum, and the other one was somebody had to establish the minimums, and you don't make any friends doing that.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, you might as well just let somebody get the minimum and then keep working it up. So.
Exactly. So at that time, Ellen had a better deal than I ever had. She was the star racer in the family.
Really?
Because helmet and leather, she was under 100 pounds and 5 feet tall. And she had a sponsor who was contracted to supply a race bike, a practice bike, a spare engine, and a tuner at the track. I was lucky to get car fare home.
Yeah.
So her tuner hadn't gotten there yet, but she was racing this little 50cc bike, which the sponsor had delivered from California to Florida for her to practice on. And she was working up, and she'd heard all the stories about breaking the engine and locking up the rear tire and falling off. And we finally got to the point where, to give her tips, and she was a very quick study, we would go out on the road to Land's End, and she would race along in the right-hand lane, and we would be in the left lane shouting tips while she's at race speed. Tuck in your elbow, tuck in your foot. And so she eventually worked her way up to 49.93 and couldn't get the record because she couldn't get over 50. So,
man, that's a bummer. But that's cool that she raced, and that she had, she had a lot of support from manufacturers and you guys. And
yep.
Cool.
She even had a helmet sponsorship.
That's awesome.
I was lucky to get a new face shield.
You weren't as cute, probably.
I know, it's hard to imagine, but yes.
Oh, well, okay. So what year, when did she race? That was 76, you said?
That was 76.
76. And then you kind of take a little break in 78.
Yes. And then I was starting a business of my own. I was teaching in the art department at Florida State University. I was head of their safety program. And yes, that's an oxymoron, art safety. It's almost as much as I was at the same time working on my PhD in safety and with a specialty in motorcycle safety. That's really an oxymoron.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go back to Bonneville, but I was starting a little business and I just couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
And then I decided I can't stay away. I love this. I want to go back and do it. But I had been a Harley guy to that point, and it suddenly struck me that maybe I should not be racing what I owned, but maybe I should buy something that was competitive.
Yeah.
And it seems such an odd thing. I'd never talked to anybody that would do that. Oh, I'm a Chevy guy.
Yeah. Isn't that funny when your mind finally changes its thought process and you're like, wait a minute, why didn't I do this all along?
Right. It's like the scales fell from my eyes and I saw the true path. So I bought a Yamaha TZ750 and I decided I needed to learn how to work on it and how to ride it. So I hired a guy to ride the thing at the Daytona 200-mile race. And that was 1983, which Bonneville was rained out. But we got an 8th at Daytona, which the winnings from that year and the next year when we got 10th, the winnings paid for the bike and all the expenses to go to Bonneville.
Wow.
And I thought, Bonneville could be paying proposition. Nobody had ever talked about that. So we came to Bonneville the first time with that bike in '84, and I think I got 3 records.
Cool.
And we were very pleased.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And then '85, I came back and I decided I want to kick some butt.
Nice.
And so we made up a very special, very weird engine, which, if you want, we can talk about later.
Yeah, you can talk about it now. You can tell us about it.
Well, it's recently been on Facebook in my memoirs.
Yes.
But what it was is the 750 has 2 crankshafts. And No, they didn't tell me. They just put in 2 crankshafts, and I set up one with a stroker so that I could advance from the 750 to the 1 liter class. And the other crankshaft was a stock stroke. So it came out to be 751. And that's part of my favorite memories of Bonneville, because I qualified and took it into impound. And after setting the record, again, 3 runs days. And back then we didn't have to put the class on the vehicle, and we didn't have the booklet, so people look at the bike and they don't know what it is,
Yeah.
they just, so it goes into impound, and, here's 3 car guys looking at my bike, and they say, okay, head off. And I say, well, it's got 2 heads. And, car guys, they either do the right or the left, or the front or the rear, because there's 2 different heads. And I said, which one you want off? And I say, oh, well, pull off the left head. And I pull it off, and there's 2 pistons, no surprise. And they measure the bore, and they measure the strokes, and they go away. And they come back, and they say, are you sure you're in the 1 liter class? I said, well, yeah, I think so. Well, your motorcycle only displaces 749 cc's. And I said, is that a problem? And they said, well, you're in the wrong class. You can't set a record that way. I said, oh, let's pull off the other head, playing dumb. And they measure the bore and stroke, and they go away, and they talk, and they come back, and they say, you realize you have 2 different strokes in the same engine. And I said, yeah. And they come back, and they're tapping their calculators, and they say, well, now it's 751. So, yeah, you're good. I wanted to run in the 650 class. So I took off a cylinder with a 66 millimeter bore and put on it one with a 54 millimeter bore, which is like a half-inch difference, and put it on there, and we ran it. We set 4 records in the 650 class, took it in for inspection, and the first group of inspectors took a new group of inspectors and said, you need to take a look at Guthrie's bike. And so they said, pull off a head. And knowing how this was going to play out, I pulled off the right-hand head, and they went away and came back and said, you're running in a 1 liter class, but your engine, you're not in the 650 class. Again, being innocent, say, oh, let's take off the other head. So they look in, and here's, 2 pistons with a 66 bore and 2 pistons with a 54 bore. And they go away, and they scratch their heads and tap the calculator, and they come back and say, well, you're legal for the class. I said, oh, good.
I knew that.
Oh, good. I knew that. But we have a question. This is from guys who work on flatheads and small blocks. Yeah. And they say, does this thing vibrate?
I was thinking that too, just to change 2 pistons into. I mean, yeah. Go ahead though. What did you tell
I gave
him?
the pistons on the right the growth hormone.
Yeah.
So I said, yes, I have to redline it at 11,000 with the 2 different bores.
Yeah.
2 different strokes. And they roll their eyes and wave me out of impound.
So funny. So it doesn't vibrate at all.
Well, yeah, it does vibrate.
Oh.
I wasn't going to tell them that.
That's so funny.
It's, when it was, as the British would say, at full chat.
Yes.
When it was a red line, it was like the hand grips went from being hand grip size to feeling like beer cans.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's so funny. I love it. Messing with the car guys. You motorcycle people.
Well, it's always been the case.
I know. I know. That's it. So I'm so glad to have a motorcycle person on just for that. It's hard to get the motors. You guys are elusive, I would say.
Elusive, yes.
So, but no, it's awesome to have one. So, okay, so this is 1984.
Right.
And so that you set 3 records, did you say, on that year? Or is this the second year?
6.
Okay, so you're doubling your records. That's fine.
And I'm so proud.
I know, I bet.
Finally,
That's
I'm proving
awesome.
my point. I know something about racing motorcycles at Bonneville.
I am a motorcycle guy. I do know how to do this.
I am.
Yes, you are. Then you come back in the next year?
I came back 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89.
Oh, yeah.
And 86, 7, and 8. Oh, I set records every year, but 88 was a wonderful year because Jim Burkdoll and I had been eyeing each other, and he was running his beautiful Pink Thunder Streamliner in the 750 class, and it was a toad. He was running a stock engine, and that was not the thing to do. But he had a budget. He had a family.
Yeah, he was raising a family, doing what he could. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. He had priorities, and Bonneville was not the highest priority.
Yeah.
So he and I chatted, and I said, well, you're not in the 2 Club. And I said, I'm not in the 2 Club. I said, why don't we get together on this? And so I built him an engine. And we plopped it down in his car. And I had come back in 88 with 1 mechanic and 4 motorcycles and his car to look after. And we had a gentleman's agreement that he would drive it the first day, I would drive it the second, he would drive it the third, and so forth, with a hope that we'd both get into the 2 Club. And what a goal that was, because if there was anybody that lived on a higher plane, it was the folks in the 2 Club.
Mm-hmm.
And there might have even been a girl in the 2 Club at that time.
There was. I know there was. No, Holly. I think Holly got in.
Holly.
Marsha got in 78.
Yes.
I know that because it's the year I was born. So I know that we talked about that.
Yeah, you know, what a sweetheart she was.
Yeah, she was cool. She is cool.
And so I got all my motorcycles ready, and we had this was another fun year for playing with the inspectors, because the Yamaha TZ, which is all I was taking for years because I wanted to concentrate, it was so versatile and so powerful that we just swept away every record. But I had a pair of blown up engines. And if you ride GZ 750s, you collect blown up engines. But I had a 4-cylinder, a 2-cylinder, and a 1-cylinder, all built on the same vehicle. This is Mickey Thompson kind of stuff, you know, where he takes a Pontiac V8 and slices it down the middle to run a 4-cylinder, and then he chops off the back half and runs it as a twin. Never quite got to a single, but I had these blown up engines. So I built one as a 175cc single engine. And it set 3 records, which, of course, Beal and Wagner came along later and just swept the board, you know, and eliminated those. But the twin, the 350, set 4 records in 88, and they're still in the book. That most people don't bother. But but with the 175 single, I was using it as the canary in the mine shaft, because that year, to run in the gas class, you had to run approved gasoline, and ERC was not there. Somebody else whose name I forget was not there. It was her only year. And I thought, boy, I've never worked with this kind of gasoline. What's it going to be like? And this is before dynos were generally available, anything like that. So what you did was take your bike and run it fast as you can, close the throttle, pull in the clutch, coast to a stop, pull a plug out, and look at it. You know, very scientific. You base all of this on, Spark plug. There's an electrode. We must be good.
We still do that a lot in our pit. So.
Oh, well, of course. Incidentally, it was always rumored that the Harley factory, when they prepared engines for their racers, they would run them on a dyno, and they'd run all kinds of settings. And when they finally got it right, they preserved the 2 plugs that were in it, marked front and rear, and issued them to the driver and said, make your plugs look like this.
Oh, very cool.
I thought, boy, that's smart.
Yeah, that is smart.
And it was Harley.
Yeah.
So it was really smart. And so I ran this 175 single down the track, and it seized hard, tight, skidded the rear tire.
Oh, no.
I thought, oh, poo. And so I hustled over to the Burkdoll pit and rejetted his engine to run a little more safely. And then he went down the track, and when it left the line, I thought, boy, that sounds a little lazy, because by this time I knew what they were supposed to sound like. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, okay, maybe it'll clean out when he goes over the horizon. But he came back with a time of something like 180. And I thought, not right. So my mechanic and I went over, and we opened the hood, and the engine was still there. We pulled the plugs. We pulled out 4, 3, 2, everything normal. We pulled out one, bone white. It's like that thing was running so lean and should have stuck the first mile. And I thought, that can't be right. And back then we didn't have digital bore scopes, so we couldn't stick a toothpick in there and see what the whole inside of the engine looked like. So I showed the plug to my mechanic, who by that time had helped me set 20 records with a 2-stroke. So he was an aircraft A&P license guy. So he's what I needed. He was a OCD on doing things right. I, on the other hand.
You're a big picture guy.
Yeah, whether it's true or not, that's the picture I had. I showed him the plug, and he kind of raised his eyebrows and kind of gestured to the number 1 exhaust pipe. And I just kind of nodded, because, all of these Burkdolls are hovering around wanting to know. And I didn't want them to know. So we pulled off the pipe, and we looked in the exhaust port, and we could see the piston. It was okay. And it's usually hottest, as you know, right next to the exhaust valve. And so I got a tiny dental mirror, and I stuck that in over the top of the piston and say, this thing hardly looks like it's been run. And meanwhile, my mechanic has been looking over the pipe to see if something's wrong with the pipe. And he nudges me with his elbow and looks down at the pipe. And I take my flashlight and I look, there's a shop rag in the pipe.
It's not totally surprising to me. I'm sorry.
Every racer can go, oh yeah, I've done that. So we extract the shop rag, we button it up, and sorry, but that was your day, Jim. I get to run it next.
Turn.
My turn. So I run it, and I go, I think like 190 or something to qualify against his father's record.
Oh, wow. Really quick, what was the class that you were running in?
J gas streamliner.
And what was the record? Do you remember that you were?
I think it was like 181.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And held by the oldest of Burkdolls, now passed away.
Yeah. With the Bluebird, I believe is.
Yes, the Bluebird. Exactly right. That beautiful little car. I'd have driven it if we could have gotten it through tech.
Yeah. No.
But, it's basically tech for a monkey, because all the safety stuff was too.
Yeah. It was way past
vintage. Vintage safety.
Vintage safety. I like that.
So I ran his car and didn't put my foot down. I wanted to make sure the engine was sound, and I think it went like 190 or something.
And you're like, ooh, this thing.
I thought,
got it.
We got something here. And then the next day, I went down the track at 200.4 and came back at 200.1. And I thought, that's a fancy job of riding or driving. I forget their cars. So a fancy job of driving to have 2 back-to-back runs to get into the 2 Club within a few tenths of a mile an hour. So we got it through inspection. I turned it over to him, and he, of course, went faster. He's a much better car driver than I was. And then he turns it over to Julie, who puts us both on the trailer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. It shows she got in that same year.
I think so.
Oh, that's so cool. I love it.
We got all these Burkdolls and me in the
and
2
a Guthrie.
Club.
Yeah.
A Guthrie, the first Guthrie.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've heard that story from when I interviewed the Burkdolls.
Right.
It was in there somewhere. I know that because I was like, I didn't realize Scott got in in a car.
A car, you know.
How
and
dare
I've been
he?
so embarrassed to say to people who actually got this club in a car.
I know, it's pretty ironic, actually, I would say. So what year was that?
I was 88.
88. Okay. And so now you got, was that one, that was obviously a major goal to get in the 2 Club for you, I would imagine.
Yes, it
so
was.
Check mark that off.
Okay, we got that bucket list item.
Yes.
But I kept coming back.
Yeah. No.
You know, it's not so much of a bucket
There's
list.
Other
that
records.
was it.
Yeah. There's lots of records out there to get. So.
And that let's touch on that now because in the late 90s, that created a controversy.
Oh.
And I don't know who was involved and what the thinking was, but I just set 3 more records, and somebody from the SCTA, I can't remember a name or a face, approached me and said, "Gosh, Scott, you have a lot of records." I said, "Well, yeah, I'm lucky to be able to do that." He said, "How many do you want?" And I'm a bike guy, so I just throw out an answer and I say, all of them.
That's right.
And I found after that, my bikes were very closely inspected.
Yes.
And it was years before I set another bike record.
Like I say, nobody cares what you're running until you run fast. And then they're like,
right. Then everybody sees what you're doing.
And that's right. So you didn't set records for a few years after that then in the 90s, early 90s?
89 was a good year for me.
Okay.
In some ways, it was my anno mirabilis, which is a British expression meaning miracle year.
I'm glad you explained it because I was like, I don't know what that means.
But in 1989, I set a record in the Burkdoll car. I built him a new motor in K. And it was a very special motor. And Jim and I have never told anybody exactly what it was. And, you know, we threw blankets over it when it was in the pits and never let anybody see it. And Julie and Jim both drove it faster than I did. Thank you. And the record is still in the book since 89 with what could be a very competitive class. Nobody knows, was it a rotary? Was it a 2-stroke? Was it 4-stroke?
Ooh, very interesting.
So I set a record in a car, and I set a record in a motorcycle with a one-way speed of 197, thank you. And,
nice.
Which got me going again.
Yeah.
And then a couple of months later, I set a world record in swimming.
Oh, yeah.
So in one season, I'd set world record in 3 different sports.
That's awesome.
One other person noticed.
Who was it?
My wife.
That's what I was going to say. So you were swimming competitively?
Yes, I've been many times world champion, world record holder in swimming.
That's so cool.
So
and then
doesn't come up much at Bonneville.
Oh, yeah. Like, tell me about your swimming career and your ballroom dancing career. You're a ballroom dancer too.
Oh, no. I hadn't talked about that for 40 years until
it.
Rocky Robinson pried it out of me in an interview for NBC, and he said, "What's this about your ballroom dancing? You were a champion ballroom dancer." And, until Dancing with the Stars came on TV, it was not very manly.
Not as cool as it was. I think it's cool. I like it.
Well, I guess it shows my softer side.
Yeah.
It shows my feminine side.
Yes.
But I was a state champion in cha-cha.
Oh.
Whatever that is.
Mr. Fred Astaire. I know cha-cha because my kids, I make them go to cotillion and they learn the cha-cha.
I was in cotillion for 6 years. And
they hate it. Well, one of them's okay with it. One of them hates it. But
I only missed, in 6 years of cotillion, and I only missed one dance. And that was where they handed out the perfect attendance awards. That's
another ironic story. Well, I love that. I love that you have, it's nice to hear. That's what I like about these stories, is to hear, not only stuff I don't know about people in Bonneville and about Bonneville, but about land speed racing, but also about their personal life. So
exactly the point, because we have thousands of people that we've had run on the Bonneville Salt Flats, and we know like 0.1% of their life.
Right.
And I was in inspection one time, and I was reading a book while I was waiting for the elusive inspectors to appear at our vehicle, and some guy comes by and says, "Oh, a reader." "Oh," I said, "Are you a reader?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." And we started talking books.
Yeah.
And it takes something special for it to come up.
Yeah.
Because you're so tuned into vehicles and mechanicals.
Yeah. But that's what I like about this. It's kind of forced to come up a little bit sometimes when you're talking about your life. Other parts creep in when you're talking about your racing. So
sometimes the interviewer has to be a little intrusive.
I don't know how intrusive I am, but people are willing to tell me stuff, I guess.
Ooh.
It
should be on TV.
Yes. No. Anyways, enough about me. Let's talk about you more. So you got your
enough about you, more about me.
More about Scott. You got better stories.
No, just more of them.
More of them. So early 90s, this is where we're at. You just had 89. You just had a great year.
I had a great year in 88, 89. And in 88, I set 12 records in 1 week, with me and a guy helping out of the back of a truck. And in 1990, I finally got in a 2 club on a motorcycle.
Oh, you did it. You got a record. Okay.
I did. And it had been my dream for decades to be able to do that. And the fact that I was already in a car didn't make any difference. I still wanted to do it on a bike. And I went 201, 201. So I was a little bit faster in a motorcycle. Same engine that was in the Burkdoll car.
Oh, yeah.
So I finally did it.
Yeah. You're a little bit lighter and more streamlined than the Burkdoll car, I guess.
It was certainly lighter, but Burkdoll car is a miracle.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Streamlining.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. And it's cool to hear them talk about it, how they get there. So, but, so you got your motorcycle 2 club record, even though you're already a life member of the 2 club. You did it in a motorcycle.
Right. And I think at that point, I was the first person to be in a car and on
to
a
break
motorcycle.
2 records. Okay.
And by that, I mean a sit-on motorcycle. Don Vesco, of course, is going 300, 400. But he was in a Streamliner both times.
Yeah. It was a streamlined motorcycle?
His was.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I have to make that differentiation so I have something.
Yes, absolutely.
To talk about.
We need our things, right?
Yeah.
Our only things. So
fastest nailhead Buick in a 29 Ford.
Exactly. We love that. Makes us special. I don't know. But so did you take a break after that? After you got that 2 club record? Or did you ever take a break again?
I'm embarrassed to say it, but I went back to cars.
Oh.
And there was a fellow that raced a Streamliner, Howard Navsker, and an engine builder, Brian Savage. And in 90, I had been talking with them about becoming one of their sponsors and one of their drivers because they were running in the 250 range. And I thought, okay, I've made the grade. I'm ready to step up. And we agreed that we come to World Finals where he was going to race for an FIA record. They had that approval to run an FIA meet. So I flew out with my driving gear and was going to race his car. And I got there after he had already been running and blown up. And so I had nothing to do. So I was looking around, and Art Arfons was there. And interestingly enough, Art and I also knew each other socially.
Oh.
Independent of Bonneville, because for a long time he was a real power in tractor pulling.
So cool. That's so fun to watch.
Absolutely. I mean, Bonneville people do you never know what. And I went to a big national level tractor pull, and Art was there with a turbine-powered John Deere. And
so crazy.
He was just smoking people right and left. And
that's awesome.
We were sitting around drinking Coca-Colas, and I said, do you ever think about Bonneville? Because he had an unfortunate ending at Bonneville. And he said, Scott, it's really funny because I wander around here and I can make $20,000 on a weekend without going over the speed limit of the parking lot. And at Bonneville, I went 600 miles an hour and never made a dime.
Yeah, that's right.
So he was there with his motorcycle, which in 90 at World Finals, which was a big disappointment to him. He kept falling over. It's a motorcycle. He wasn't used to that. So that was the last time he tried the motorcycle. He brought it back as a car, and it was not enough to keep him in the sport. But I talked to Howard later, and I said, you want to sell that car? I figured he was at his low point, and he sold me the car.
You saw an opportunity.
Well, that's it. If you own it, it's worthless. If I own it, it's worth a fortune. It's racer economics.
That's right.
And so I bought the car, and I partnered with Jack Dolan, the secret brain power of the sport. He was such a great guy, and we partnered for about 5 years. And so we got the car. Jack built an engine and put in it, and that was my greatest and worst car experience, because at the end of the week, I had gone with 1 liter on gasoline, turbo. I had gone 256 last mile, 258 exit. So it was still picking up at the end. But earlier in the week, I was just stepping my way up. Let's try 5 pounds of boost. Let's try 8 pounds. Let's try 10 pounds, because I'm just a motorcycle guy. I don't know anything about this stuff. Besides, you can't fall over. What's the challenge in that? So on one run, I felt it was a good run. Turned out the best speed was 142, which was my lifetime best. And I got down to the far end, turned off the track. It was another year where there were little weather problems. And going to the return road, I turned a little too tight. And the back end came around, hit a salt heave, car rolled, came to rest very near the return road, which was good. Except that when I finally collected myself and looked out the windshield, the ground was white and the sky was blue. I went, wait a minute. Oh, I'm upside down.
Yeah.
And here I am, and I was running like 13 safety belts, 2 for ankle, 2 for wrist, 2 shoulder belts. I was running 2 chest belts so that if I bounced around in the seat, I wouldn't bust my spine. That was our innovation. 2 lap belts, 2 groin belts. So
You were snug.
I was snug, as only Bob Higbee could make you snug.
Yep.
And I realized, oh, I'm upside down. Oh, well, that's no problem. I'll just get out of my belts and, oh, wait a minute. I'm upside down. This is a streamliner. There's a canopy. How do I? So I started thinking about this a little more seriously. And I thought, I wonder if I can't rock myself and turn the thing right side up. Well, somebody will pull me out. And I found out later that I had gone over the horizon and the tower couldn't tell that I was upside down.
Oh, no.
The top and the bottom were painted the same color and the stripe was still horizontal.
Oh, no.
So they didn't know.
Nobody's coming for you.
Nobody's coming. And I fortunately didn't know that at the time. So I'm wondering what to do. And I think, well, it's no big deal. There's no sense getting out of the belts because then I just collapse into the car and maybe hit something sharp. So I'll just wait. And when you're down at the far end after a heavy run, the only thing you hear is the tick of cooling metal. And that can be kind of comforting because it's so peaceful, except that I also heard the glug, glug, glug.
You're like, oh, no.
Of fluid.
Mm.
And I thought, no big deal. That's water. Glug, glug, glug. That's got to be water. If it was gasoline, I'd smell it. Glug, glug, glug. And I know it's water. I can tell the sound of water. Well,
I can tell the sound of water.
I can tell. I'm a bike guy. I know the sound of gasoline spilling. Well, about that time, Jack's wife, Sammy Dolan, wonderful, wonderful person, pulls, I didn't know that's who it was at that time, but a car pulls right up next to me.
Yeah.
A civilian car pulls up right next to me, like 5 feet away. And I vaguely can see a door open and a leg come out, another leg come out, and there's this pat, 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 that characteristic sound of shoes on crunchy salt comes up right next to the tiny little windshield on the front of the canopy. And I tapped on the canopy to let the person know that I was conscious.
Yeah.
And the feet disappear. And then the car's CB radio goes off. It's Guthrie. He's in the car. He's trapped. He's upside down. He's on fire.
Oh, jeez.
And, the feet reappear. And I tapped a little more vigorously to let her know I shared her concern. And I hear this, whoof! And Sammy flips the car upright.
Oh, man.
Opens the canopy, grabs me by the chest of my friend. Sammy, the belts. I'm doing the belts. I'm doing the belts.
She's like,
and I can start to feel the heat.
Oh, no.
And I get out of the car. Finally, I'm standing there looking at it. And Mikey Cook appears with a fire crew and shoves an extinguisher into my hand and said, "Put your car out." I said, "Mike, I'm trying to collect myself. That's your job." He said, "Well, you're dressed for it." So I say,
that's a good point.
I know. We both had our points. And finally, the car got put out. And at that time, Jack appears. He was in the push vehicle. He appears, and he heard all of this going on his CB radio. And he appears, and he points at Cook, and he points at the button on the side of the engine compartment that says, "Push, fire." He slams on it, and there's like Freon everywhere. And the car quietly settled down. And then it started to roll away. And Cook says, "What's your car doing?" Jack said, oh, it's just rolling downhill. Reaches inside and pulls on the brake, and Mikey says, there's no hills at Bonneville. So Jack was in his white uniform, of course, and I looked at him, and his whole front of his uniform is covered with some orange substance. And I said, what is all that? And his son, Sean, said, oh, well, when we started down here, he was drinking an orange soda. And when he heard the word fire, he slammed down on an orange soda and it just fountained all over him.
I was trying to think, what is this orange stuff? Yeah, that's so funny.
So
it's concerned, huh?
My wife and I had made it a point. This is after Craig Breedlove had a problem one time. I worked with him in 73. No happening at Bonneville is all bad if you can get a funny story out of it.
Yeah, that's right. I like that.
So that's what we do.
That's a good story, though. I mean, I bet you it felt like an eternity while you were waiting there for somebody to show up.
It's science fiction the way time expands.
Oh man, that's crazy. I'd be like, oh my gosh. I'd start to get nervous. I would feel panicky if I was like upside down that long waiting for somebody. Because that would take them. What mile were you at?
8.
So did you get, and she's with the push truck or with the crew, the recovery crew?
She was at the 5.
Oh, okay.
She was 5 of the 4. She was watching me come through.
Okay. Whoa.
The future fireball right here.
Even the 3 miles, man, that would be hard. But yeah, that's true. That's a good story. And I like that good perspective. Because what else do you have besides that?
Well, yeah, when you're done with Bonneville, all you have is stories and a couple certificates.
That's right.
There's no money and no glory, so we might as well have fun.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I love that. What did you do after that? So were you done with cars?
I changed my shorts.
You're like, I bet.
So, but I thought, maybe, except for lighting myself on fire, I had a skill with cars. So Jack and I continued with the car, and we just continued putting engines in it.
Yeah.
1, 2, we were planning on 3, and had enough parts to build a 4th engine. And the program just kind of wound down. It was expensive. Jack and Sammy had 3 kids, and 2 of them still in school, and grandchildren on the way. And he was doing more charity work. He was helping out with junior dragsters.
Oh, cool.
In San Diego.
Yeah.
And so I eventually sold the car.
And that was your car career.
Brief, meteoric, but eventually.
But there was a good story in there.
We got the good story. That was the whole point.
That's right. So you switched back to cars then? I mean, to motorcycles?
I did. I was willing to proceed with cars, but no opportunities appeared.
Okay.
I like the liners because they're the fastest of all with the power that they have. And the administration, the logistics, the personnel is just crushing. But with a motorcycle, you can do it with one or 2 people.
I know. You always see these guys show up, or girls show up with themselves and maybe somebody else, and you're like, dang, that's smart. Little, toolbox, and that's it.
Exactly. And there's a program, I forget the fellow's name. It's in the rule book a lot of places. I think he's in the medical business, and he sponsors young people, primarily women, to race at Bonneville, and they get very inexpensive bikes. They get like $800 bikes, and they fix them up and they race here, and they get leathers and helmet and all the other stuff. And he is apparently very, very good at finding the open records.
Oh, I've heard. I don't know if you were telling me this or somebody else was, but I've heard about this.
And so, these girls come out and they go fully 75 miles an hour. If they were on I-80, they'd get a ticket for blocking traffic. And they set records, and they get 90% of the experience for 10% of the risk and 10% of the cost.
Right.
And it's kind of like Little League.
Yeah.
That they can progress from there because
just great seat time on the salt.
Yes.
And how do you guys call it seat time in the motorcycle world?
We do.
Okay. So yeah, just
That's
great.
because there's a seat.
I know, but I was like, maybe they call it something else, something cooler. I don't know. Yeah, great seat time for them to get that experience and just to kind of, understand how the salt works.
Yes, I think it's a great thing that he's doing, and I've talked to some of the girls that race with him, and they are bright.
Yeah.
And they just makes you want to put a handful of money in their hands and say, go, get in the club.
Figure something out.
Get in the club.
Do they only do that at Bonneville, or do they do it at other land speed racing venues?
The only place I know of is Bonneville.
Cool. That's really cool. Yeah. So anyway, back to your story.
That brought us up to 95.
Yeah.
And I was suffering Bonneville burnout. And which we all know, fear. And sometimes you realize you have it after you've done it.
Yeah.
And I became the 9th member of the East Coast Timing Association. And I realized that they raced a 3-day weekend. You could run for record 3 days on a weekend, and they did it 6 times a year, which is 18 record running days on pavement. And inspection was basically fill out a form, because they checked everything that would need to be known except teardown in the initial scrutineering. We decided that tearing down was just too much. This is for a much more amateur crowd than Bonneville. So we trusted the other competitors to know if somebody had made a mistake. And, that's really not a 500. That's really a 2-liter engine.
Yeah.
So you could set 3, 4, 5, 6 records a day.
Yeah.
And I wanted that.
Yeah.
I wanted that. So I raced with the East Coast from 95. And of course, being somebody that looks to a legacy, I was in car number 1 and made the first run down the first track. So
is that in North Carolina?
It became North Carolina. It had been in Moultrie, Georgia.
Oh, it was in Georgia first.
Which is 50 miles from my house.
Right. I didn't know that it was in Georgia first.
I could go race a motorcycle and go home and sleep in my own bed with my own wife and
go back
and race again the next day. And so I beat it to death.
Yeah.
I guess one of my peaks was with the ECTA was to set 20 records over 200 miles an hour in one day.
Wow.
And I got a little pushback from the West Coast on that, who were used to the conventional style of setting records. And Rick Ikuchi stood up for me. He said, wait a minute. Think how much money he has donated to the association. If it's $200 for a class change,
yeah,
he's donated $4,000 in class changes.
This is a good deal.
Yeah, it is for them.
For them.
For them, yeah. Well, but I got to say 200 over 200.
Yeah.
Or 20 over 224 hours.
That's really cool.
So one of the guys we had racing with us was Rick Yancey, who was one of the first people to really understand turbocharged Hayabusas. His bike was the first over 250, first over 251, 255, 256, and 260. And I was doing test riding for him. He drove it himself, big guy. And he wanted to try the first race at Goliad, Texas, and which was a very, very tricky track because it's a very short shutdown. And he said, okay, Scott, you got the call. And I said, wait a minute, I'm 4th on the rotation. He said, well, everybody else is on vacation. And I said, oh, I'll do it. And so I went 251. And at the time, that was a world record for the fastest street bike. And so that was the apogee of my career.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I went to the airport, drank a 6-pack of Dos Equis, and went home and told my wife, I said, okay, that's it for high-speed stuff.
Yeah.
She pretended to be upset.
That's
and
funny.
she said, I never told you to not do that. And I said, well, I'm telling myself not to do it.
Yeah, I've heard those shutdowns are really crazy on the asphalt, that it's pretty intense.
I went 200 yards into the weeds
Ooh,
on the 251 run.
on a bike.
On a bike.
Open.
on a bike.
It was like a naked bike, right? Or an open, like it wasn't streamlined.
No.
That's my point.
It looked like a street bike.
Yeah.
But there was a funny story involved. Of course.
Yes.
On a previous run, I was going down the track, and based on data, not my wistful thinking, but on data, I was going about 230, and all of a sudden, I was blind. I couldn't see where I was going. The windshield had become translucent. Everything was foggy, like I was in a rainstorm or something with no wipers. And I started thinking, this had happened at Bonneville. We can go back to that if you want. But it was clear. And I smelled, and I thought, it's not brake fluid. It's not engine oil. It's got to be water. So I looked at the water temperature gauge, and that was not a problem. I'm keeping the throttle wide open. I mean, who wants to ruin a bad run, a really good run, just because your engine's going to explode? It was his. So I'm rocketing down the track at what I thought was going to be a record speed. And I realized that the engine was okay, but it was still very difficult to see where I was going. And on this short track, I ran past the end lights because I couldn't see where shutdown began. I just went through it, and then the rev limiter, I had shifted in high, and the rev limiter winked at me, and I thought, this thing is set for 260. I can't have gone that fast. So I stuck my head off. The wind blew the water off my face shield, and I realized I've blown it. I'm going off the track. Say goodbye. Sorry for the bike, Rich. And so I bumped to a stop, and by the time I got turned around, the ambulance was starting down the dirt road to get me. But I drove the bike back to the pits, and Rich is unflappable. He plugs his laptop into the bike, and the bike told us what had happened, and that was he had an intercooler that was charged with ice, like everybody else does nowadays. He was one of the first, and it was my job to fill it with ice.
Oh, the driver's job.
Oh, so sorry, Rich. And the way you do that in his bike is you fill a thing full of ice, top it off with water, turn the pump on to circulate the cold water until everything comes down as far as it's going to go on that load of ice. And then you drain the water out, pack in more ice, put in a little more water, rinse and repeat until everything is down to temperature. Well, in the middle of all of this, I had spilled some water and ice into the belly pan of the motorcycle where it lay waiting. And I got up to about 240 miles an hour, and the windshield siphoned air and water from the belly pan all over my face.
Oh, man.
So
it was water this time.
That time it was, again, it was water. So cheated death again.
Yes, that's pretty crazy though. So do you guys have to go, you have to go back up the record, right, on the asphalt?
No. That's one of the beauties of asphalt racing is you run a mile, you go through this 132-foot trap, which is certainly as accurate as NHRA.
Yeah.
So and then you go change classes. At the ECTA, I'd put like 10 classes on a bike, each one covered up with a tear off. So I'd pull in an inspection. They'd start filling out the form. I'd tear off and go out and run another class.
That's cool. That's fun. Yeah, it sounds like you had a blast though. But that was 250 was the fastest that you were like, that's it.
Yeah, so my lifetime best is 251 on a bike and 258 in a car.
Both very fast. Yeah, but the bike one is definitely really fast on asphalt.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I would run sometimes in the East Coast Timing Association and get one run out of a race tire.
Yeah.
The back tire.
Yeah. Wow. And so you were pretty heavily involved in the ECTA?
Yeah, for a while I was a tech inspector, and I discovered once again that you don't make any friends being a tech inspector.
Oh, no.
And sometimes I was too liberal.
Yeah.
And other riders complained I was being too liberal.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, I'm saving you time and money. He said, yeah, but it's his bike you're being liberal with.
Yeah. They probably thought you were super strict on theirs. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that would be hard. That's a hard gig. But if anybody could do it, you could. You were probably the best and knew what to, with your PhD in motorcycle safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't finish the PhD. I'm an ABD.
Oh.
All but dissertation. I went off to Bonneville during the summer break. And when I came back, the department had disappeared.
Oh.
I mean, literally, the faculty were all going to other cities. The classrooms were empty. There
Darn
were no
it.
books.
Well, you pretty much have your PhD.
Well.
Yeah. So, well, what else was after that? So you're doing the land speed racing on asphalt. You're doing Bonneville.
Right.
Doing both of these. These are the 90s. This is just kind of through the mid 90s.
And I started to get the itch to come back to Bonneville.
Oh, okay, so you weren't going to Bonneville at this time.
I took a few years off in
Okay.
the late 90s. I would fly out and watch and
Yeah.
doing what I do best, and that is going from pit to pit,
Commenting.
commenting, giving people useless and misleading advice.
I bet.
And I got the itch.
Yeah.
And I had to come back. And the fabulous, intelligent, wise Larry Forstall, also a 2 Club member, first member in this century, sponsored me to a Hayabusa out there. And I set a couple of records with a Hayabusa.
Cool.
And I thought, ooh.
I like these.
It doesn't taste like water. It was very good. And I guess the peak of that year was I was 1 mile an hour faster than Rick Kikuchi.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, ooh, maybe I can ride.
Yeah, he's good. Yeah, he is good.
He is undersung. He is a good rider, but it has been overshadowed by how fantastic he is in cars. He could come back and set 50 records on motorcycles.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think I knew him more on the end where he was the car and where he was racing the Streamliner. Was it a Streamliner that he had? What was it?
At the end, he was driving a Costella Streamliner.
Yeah. That's what I remember the most, but yeah, anyway. But he rode and he drove and he did it all well.
Yeah, and he built his engines, he tuned his car, and he went world record pace. He went over 400 with a small black on gas.
Yeah.
So, big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
And then I was noodling along through the 2000s, not really racing very much on pavement, not really racing very much at Bonneville, but coming out. And I had a big team for pavement. The core team had 12 people. IT, mechanic, logistics, photography, every single member of the team was a 2 Club member.
Oh, wow.
It was a huge brain trust, and we had lots of bike and set lots of records, had lots of fun, spent a lot of money.
And this was just under Guthrie Racing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2009, I ran into John Levi, and we helped each other with our careers. I saw him driving his little tiny 50cc motorcycle, and he was an impound.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've heard him tell this story. I want to hear your.
Oh, okay.
I want to hear your side.
Well, my story, which is of course the true, was that I saw the bike and I looked at it and I asked him. He was an impound, so obviously he had done something right, and which was true. And I asked him what speed he was going, and he told me. I thought, I bet that could be faster, so I criticized him, criticized his motorcycle. This is junk. That's junk.
Yeah.
Are you sure you're in the right sport? All this stuff. And he, of course, said, what an asshole. And his father-in-law said, wait a minute. You realize who you're talking about?
Yeah.
And
his dad knew. He was like, yeah.
The father-in-law knew. So John didn't care.
Yeah.
Still thought I was an asshole.
Yeah.
And I was.
And I was.
And I was. But we realized that we had something to offer each other, that I had a little experience and he had quite a bit of bravery and fantastic fabrication and assembly and tuning skills. So I suggested, why don't you do this and this to your bike? And the next time he ran it, he was 10% faster. So that was in 2009, and then we've been partners ever since.
Yeah.
So
you told him to tuck in his arms. That's what he says.
Right.
Give him some riding tips.
Yep.
Yeah. And yeah, you guys have been killing it ever since. I mean, you guys dominate in records.
I always hesitate to use the word dominate because
I used it.
Well, thank you. Now I don't have to say it, but yeah, we're well recognized.
Yeah.
Between us, we have a couple of hundred records.
Yeah, which is crazy. So what did you do with John? And then you kind of come fully back into Bonneville at that point when you hook up with John?
I gave him suggestions and stepped back.
See if he took them.
And, we noodled around with the little classes for a long time, 50, 100, and 125. And we were looking for odd motorcycles to fit in odd classes because as you know, from all these years, there's like 800 motorcycle records in the book, but there's 3,000 classes available. So we wanted to populate it with, first it was Scott Guthrie Racing and then Guthrie-Levie Racing. And so we would get these odd motorcycles. We used a lot of communist motorcycles. We got them imported from Red China, like Lifan, whatever that means. And we found that the Chinese produced decent enough stuff that was inexpensive enough that if we burned ahead, we'd throw the motor away.
Wow.
And just stick another one in.
Just like everything else from China, basically. Like, yeah.
I hesitate to criticize, but they certainly did what we wanted.
Yeah.
And then John started on the bigger stuff. And once we got to the Hayabusas, I could not get him to ride the little stuff anymore.
Oh, yeah.
But I knew it was going to happen. And he graduated and, he went. We both found our milieu when we started on sidecars. And the sidecar that he ran this week is one that I bought from John Stieg and initially built an engine that John put in it. And we're having great success with it because now it's been top speed of the meet.
Yeah. Oh, it was. You got the top speed of the motorcycle top speed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have to compliment John, especially on the Streamline sidecar. And I didn't get a chance to do that at the riders meeting, but John is in the 2 Club, 3 chapter. His father's in the 2 Club, both of them in that little kneeling down sidecar. And they're both miners in Nevada looking for that big deal.
Yeah.
And Alan's stepfather was a miner. They're all basically a Basque family from the north of Spain.
Oh, I didn't know they were Basque. It's interesting.
I know. You kind of hate to say that in public, but they're just Bascos. But they're bright guys. They're used to taking care of what they do. They're resourceful.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I think the audience at the writers' meeting would have loved is once John figured out what we were doing with that kneel down sidecar, is he did the figuring out. He made the chalk lines on the floor. He ordered the tubing. He cut, bent, and notched the tubing, welded the whole thing together, hand hammered the aluminum body, fitted it, painted it, built the motor, designed the steering, put it all together, 320 miles an hour.
That's Bonneville. I mean, that's land speed racing. You know,
that is self-sufficient.
That's very cool.
And how many people do we know now that basically one person built a 300-mile-an-hour Streamliner, including driving it?
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody.
Yeah, no.
So
there might be, but yeah, I can't, nothing off the top of my head like that.
I hope you have them on this show.
We'll see. Well, I already have had John on this, so there you go. Well, that's so cool. You and John have been great partners. I know from interviewing him how much he respects you and looks up to you, and guys do well together.
I should adopt him as my grandson.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, I feel like I know you have a million stories, but we've gotten a good 30,000-foot view, and you almost have gone as long as John went on his podcast.
Oh my goodness! Well,
maybe as long.
We can both be pretty chatty.
Yeah, maybe as long, but that's great. I love it. I love to get all that. But people can follow you on your Facebook page, right? Like that you tell a lot of stories on your Facebook page if they follow.
Absolutely, and I'll do a little shameless self-promotion here. Is you can find my stuff on all the major Bonneville land speed racing, etc. outlets on Facebook. You can find it on my homepage, which oddly enough is Scott Guthrie. I kind of run against the grain on Facebook, and I use my own name. But you can see my memoirs there, where I started publishing them with Wendy at Bonneville Racing News, and starting with that story of Mickey Thompson in 1959. And in 5 years, I've gotten all the way up to 1988.
Oh, wow.
So I must be going to live a long time because I've got to get up to
Yes, you are. You got to catch up. Yep. That's something to make sure you keep on kicking. So anyways, but I appreciate you coming on and telling me your stories, and go to his Facebook page and follow his memoirs because they're very detailed and very good. While you are checking out Scott Guthrie's memoirs on Facebook, please, if you haven't already, go to my Facebook or Instagram page and to follow all the latest from Land Speed Legends. Also, please like and share this podcast. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to Land Speed Legends. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, keep up with the show on Facebook and Instagram under Land Speed Legends. Until next time.